The Gdansk Project, Origins. How does one explain the Gdansk Project and the circumstances that created it 30 years ago? Fate may be the only answer. I know that any action I took to bring it about was purely accidental. I was at mid-level at the University of Utah Theater Department, a tenured, two-book professor whose career was going nowhere. My dissertation and my first book were in English political theater, and between 1971 and 1978, I had directed 35 plays, primarily in political theater, gradually drifting into that most political of American subjects, black theater. In 1978, I took a step up, being told as I lifted the pen to sign my contract that I wasn't expected to direct, but was expected to publish, primarily in black theater, in the whitest part of America. A number of articles in my second book, From Class to Caste, were duly noted and totally unread by my department. I could stay comfortably at that level for the rest of my career. Try moving my wife and college-age children somewhere else, or retool my career in another way. In 1990, I returned to my first love by applying to be a Fulbright senior lecturer in the United Kingdom, and was remarkably successful. I drew great interest from Reading, a well-regarded college just up the road from London. This success was somewhat complicated by my own department failing to grant me a sabbatical. It went instead to an acting teacher who went on to study voice at Central College in London. I didn't blame her. It was clear that my only purpose was to act as a shield which would allow the department to follow its true purpose as a professional training school. In 1991, I applied again, and on January 6, 1992, the hoped-for sabbatical appeared in my mailbox. Unfortunately, I'd already received my Fulbright rejection. I was standing in our kitchen on Park Street on Thursday afternoon, January 9th, when the phone rang. It was Muriel Jaffe of the Council for International Exchange of Scholars. Would I like to take the American Studies position at the University of Gdansk in Poland? The school year ran from October to June, with the month of September used for orientation. I would teach 2 courses a semester, perhaps direct a play. Housing was provided, as well as a stipend to supplement my sabbatical pay and the Fulbright grant. I turned to my wife, who was making supper across the room. "Do you want to go to Poland?" I asked. "Why not?" she replied. It was like taking the cork out of a bottle. To begin with, having married me, Marilyn proved to be seldom frightened by anything. Second, all sorts of family secrets began to reveal themselves. The East Prussia from which Grandfather's shrine migrated was Poland before the 19th century and after World War I. He had a different father than his 6 brothers and sisters, but nobody knew who that was. All the family had was a photo of a man in uniform. He came from a town called Sonnenborn, which in German means sunflower, and is now called Słonecznik, which in Polish means sunflower. We visited that fall and were welcomed like old friends by Poles who had lived in New Jersey. Marilyn made use of her many hours in the LDS archives and found a birth certificate that listed no father but had the two sisters of the man she married as witnesses. They had an older brother with the same name as Grandfather Schrein, who had died just before his birth in the Prussian army in Gdansk. Close enough? Perhaps you will enjoy this coincidence as well. The man who was responsible for hiring me was Andrzej Sinova, the Deputy Director of Education in the English Institute. He too had been a Fulbright Scholar, studying in New York under James Hatch, one of America's leading scholars of black theater. According to Andrzej, I was the only name on the International Exchange of Scholars list with a background in that area. So, naturally, he chose me. Andrzej also liked that Marilyn and I were actors and introduced us to the Festival of Drama in English, which had moved to Gdansk from Warsaw 2 years earlier under the leadership of Adam Ruszewski. Adam was also Marilyn's partner in the production of radio documentaries she sent back to KRCL in Salt Lake City. Sponsored by the British Council, the festival featured not only entries from the universities, but from other schools all over the country. The council also brought in professional companies from the UK, Ireland, and Scotland, primarily to hold workshops for the Polish students. We were to take part in an adaptation of the Canterbury Tales by one of our colleagues, Tomasz Krzyzewski. It was interesting material, and Tomasz was a fine fellow / appalling director. We began rehearsing in late October and opened a 90-minute show on March 23rd, primarily because so few people showed up for rehearsal. The only advantage was that those of us who did rehearse were seen in a multitude of roles, some of which we eventually played in the 6 performances before we closed on March 29th. At least I presumed we were closing. On April 21st, when we got home from a lecture I gave at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, Tomasz met me with the news that The Summoner's Tale and The Friar's Tale were to be played 2 nights later at a place called the Cotton Club. We were to rehearse at 10 a.m. that morning and perform at 10 p.m. that night for an affair called the Shakespeare Birthday Party, with Tomasz as the bard himself. The purpose of the party had nothing to do with Duke Ellington and the Cotton Club legend, and everything to do with a plan by our colleague, Jerzy Limon, to replace the Gdansk fencing school. Built by actors from the Fortune, the Globe's chief rival, during the plague year of 1611, and serving as a performance space for visiting companies until the middle of the 18th century. Limon's hope seemed bizarrely impractical as midnight approached for an audience that had been drinking since 8 p.m., but the Gdansk Globe Theater opened in 2014, and in 2019, Limon himself gave a tour of the magnificent edifice to me and Karolina Jancukowicz, who was one of the actors in the 1993 Festival of Drama in English. A year later, he was dead of COVID-19. But at the time, with the crowd cheering, drinking, and bidding on collectibles, I have never experienced a more Shakespearean moment in my life. Marilyn, me, and Tarek Safransky, an undergraduate with piercing eyes, played The Friar's Tale. With me using my position as an official in the church in order to cheat an old woman out of her hard-earned goods, Tarek, a demon in disguise, sees to it that I get what I deserve, to the delight of the audience. However, the Canterbury Tales was not our only delight of the festival, or even our only performance. We'd begun rehearsing it in October, and our last performance was April 23rd. But by that time, we'd already done 3 performances of another play in 3 different Polish cities, and I'd begun rehearsing a third. It was A.R. Gurney's Love Letters, certainly the least theatrical play ever to be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. 2 characters read from their scripts and never make eye contact until the very end of the play. It wasn't just that I've never ceased to be moved by the ending, I never ceased to be surprised. The possibility of doing it for our classes occurred to us as we sat through a December 11, 1992, Warsaw lecture complaining about finding theater material that would be easily produced and easily understood by our students. Before the afternoon was over, we were meeting with Lisa Heiling, the Denver-born American Center Cultural Director, about a countrywide Love Letters tour. That never came about, but on March 15th, we played the Warsaw Acting School and are told, quote, "There wasn't a dry eye in the house," unquote. We were also introduced to the Polish translator of Love Letters. I had a paper accepted by the Fulbright Conference in Poznan, and they scheduled Marilyn and me to perform Love Letters on April 16th. Somewhere in between, someone decides that we should do the Festival of Drama in English as well, and we performed there on April 1st. I'm sad that we never did the show after Poznan, but then Poland seemed like such a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Or was it? On the evening of March 31st, we were at the Teatra Miniatura watching the Scarecrow Company of Belfast, Northern Ireland, do Girls, a play by Shifra Campbell. It features 2 sisters in abusive relationships, one with her husband and one sharing a lover with a friend. It is the time of troubles in Northern Ireland, and the play could be a parable or a literal description of the treatment of women. But killing the thing that you love is the theme, and I find it unsettling, at least partly for the shortcomings of the production. It consists of brief scenes, some virtually wordless. The projections on the screens distract from the action, the actors can't be heard, and the entrances and exits disrupt the play's rhythm. Nevertheless, I'm fascinated enough to wangle an interview 2 days later with the author and the director. I don't yet realize that Girls is the play that will bring me back to Gdansk. Meanwhile, Tadeusz Wolanski and I are preparing to perform John Mortimer's The Dock Brief. Meanwhile, Marilyn and I have visited Budapest, delivered a paper in Poznan, lectured in Utrecht, done 3 performances of Love Letters and 1 of Canterbury Tales, and come home to a university on strike. On June 8th, I write to the Scarecrow Company to ask for a copy of Girls. On the 26th, we are in Northern Ireland itself, staying with relatives of my mother, whose family were victims of the potato famine. We are now in Girls' country, and everyone who is not a potato farmer is a policeman or policewoman. When we return to London, I'm taken aside for interrogation because the Gdansk-Belfast-Dublin route is a favorite of people smuggling money into Ireland. They let me go. By the end of the summer, we are back in Utah, but I can't get either Girls or the Festival of Drama in English out of my head. In November and December, I find myself working on D grants to pay for taking girls to Poland. Although my first reaction is that, having seen the play last year, they won't be interested in a rerun. I cannot remember writing Adam Rusziwowski, but I must have, because on December 20th, he wrote back to welcome the University of Utah and girls into the 1994 festival, and offering me a stipend to teach a workshop. What 2 years ago was an accident is rapidly becoming a way of life. Is that fate?